The war of words between China and the United States continues. It's only intensifying, with Beijing now warning of strong countermeasures against any move that damages China's interests. The new warning comes at a time when US lawmakers are drafting new sanctions on Chinese entities. The proposed bill will prevent Americans from investing in foreign companies linked to the Chinese army. China could be staring at major losses once the sanctions are in place. The US-China relationship has reached an all-time low over the past few months. The two sides are sparring over China's handling of the pandemic and the new security laws in Hong Kong. The United States has provided unequivocal support for the pro-democracy protesters in Hong Kong. The US has stripped Hong Kong of its special status, thereby urging American investors and companies to pull out of the city. Despite the move, Hong Kong has said that it does not plan to change its currency's peg to the US dollar. Hong Kong's Foreign Secretary said there was no sudden outflow of capital since the tensions first escalated. Meanwhile, pro-democracy protests have been intensifying in Hong Kong's central district. These demonstrations are likely to intensify further as we approach the 4th of June, which marks the anniversary of the infamous Tiananmen Square massacre.
點解你而家口口聲聲話幫我哋香港？點解你要制裁？
And joining us live on the broadcast this minute is our correspondent Richard Kimberge from Hong Kong. Richard, first up, give us a better sense of what the reactions have been like on the ground to the US support, first to the Hong Kongers, and also the moves that it is now taking against China.
Well, clearly there are two distinct sides here to the reaction. There's, of course, the reaction of the pro-democracy protesters who throughout this past 12 months have been pushing for more rights for Hong Kong, for more rights for Hong Kongers, and have been very much against any kind of encroachment by the Chinese government into Hong Kong, especially during this period that still is inside this 50-year period that's in the Basic Law Agreement of the handover back from 1997 until 2047, which of course is 50 years hence. And the idea that China is pushing through this national security law in the way that it is has angered many of those pro-democracy protesters who have seen this as yet another example of why they have to stand up and fight for what they believe is the only way they can save the autonomous existence of Hong Kong. Now, that's one side of the reaction. The other side of the reaction, of course, is from the pro-China camp, both in Hong Kong and, of course, the Chinese government themselves, who are looking at the way that the US government is influencing international opinion towards what's happening in Hong Kong, and they're becoming even stronger with the rhetoric they were already giving 12 months ago, which is basically, again, this is an internal matter for China. It has nothing to do with the rest of the world. It should not be discussed at, for example, the United Nations Security Council. It has no place for discussion at, for example, the G7. Is really a Chinese matter because, as the Chinese government is pointing out very strongly over the weekend and again today, Hong Kong is part of China, so there's nothing more to it. Anybody else can leave this to be an internally discussed matter, and that's the end of it. And they're now saying that if the US takes any measures against China or against Hong Kong, whether it's economic sanctions, whether it's sanctions effectively against Chinese students studying in the United States, China is absolutely ready to take countermeasures. It will not sit by and let the US dictate international policy with regards to what China is planning to do in Hong Kong. So again, things are intensifying again, just as they might have been 12 months ago. It's incredible to stand here after 12 months of reporting on the protest movement and almost 12 months before that reporting on the US-China trade war and feel that the US-Chinese relations are as bad as they ever have been. Quite amazing, really, to think that this is where we're at right now.
Right, and you've been closely tracking the pro-democracy movement for the last several months. Over the past few days, we've seen an intensifying protest movement. What's the situation like on the ground as we speak?
Well, certainly today has been relatively calm and peaceful. Last night there was a gathering outside a subway station where, back during the most intense moments of the protest movement, there were some fairly ugly scenes when police moved in to try and remove protesters from that area, and they actually went down into the subway and started arresting people. Even in the train itself, tear gas was fired in the subway. This was one of the ugliest scenes of the entire protest movement, and so that's always been marked every month by protesters, trying to make sure people don't forget that day. That happened last night, but it was very peaceful. It had police monitoring the whole thing, but ultimately there was no incident. However, this would not probably have happened a month ago, because during the effects of the virus pandemic here, pretty much, of course, any gathering of any protest variety, just like any gathering at all, just stopped. And so what's happened here is, as the number of virus cases has shrunk to almost nothing over the last couple of weeks, the protest organisers and the individual protesters themselves have started to become more confident to come out again, to voice their frustrations. And of course, with the Chinese government pushing through this security law, it's given them a very strong incentive to do that. And we're now just 2 or 3 days away. It's now, 3 days from the June 4th anniversary of Tiananmen Square, and this is something that's always been marked in Hong Kong. Every year it's a very big event for any kind of protest movement, especially now, of course, with what's happened in the past 12 months. The interesting thing now is that the protest organisers have formally applied for a permit to hold a gathering on June 4th, and that's been summarily banned and rejected by the police on the grounds of the virus still being too big a concern. So it's going to be very interesting on the 4th. We've normally had a lot of people, we're talking tens of thousands of people, marching and gathering on June 4th every year. Now the police have said outright this is banned. So now the protest organisers are trying to find other ways to mobilise people all over the city, and indeed all over the world, to try and still mark June 4th, even if they are not allowed to gather. But I suspect it will not be that simple. My expectation is that there will still be some kind of gathering, because the frustration on the part of protesters here, I think, is a little bit too much to simply say, well, OK, you're banning June 4th as a protest organised gathering, therefore we're all going to stay at home. I suspect there will still be some kind of protest event, but it certainly won't be on the scale that we're used to seeing at this time.
All right, so we're leaving it there for the moment. Richard, thanks very much for those updates.